into this issue of policy and access. And some of you might know, but most of you probably don't, that we've been involved in different ways in Right to Try advocacy efforts over the last few years, trying to open up access to psilocybin and other psychedelics through Right to Try laws. And so Right to Try is Colorado was actually the first state to pass a Right to Try law, I think in 2014. And since then, most states have one, and we have one federally. And basically, it allows folks who are facing a terminal illness or life-threatening illness to directly access a medicine that's under investigation without having to go through like an FDA process. And so whether patients have a right to access psilocybin under Right to Try is a complicated question. It's not totally clear. So we've been involved in conversations on amending Right to Try laws in the state of Colorado, made some headway, but then not fully because it hasn't been amended yet, but sometimes it's a work in progress. And then there's this other effort that is being spearheaded by Kathryn Tucker. Kathryn, are you able to hear us?
Yep.
Oh,
hello.
Works. Welcome. And so yeah, we're a proud sponsor of the Right to Try Advocacy Fund that Kathryn Tucker, an attorney with the Emerge Law Group, is spearheading. And Kathryn's worked on many campaigns for psychedelic reform. This one, leading the effort to open access to psilocybin therapy under Right to Try, is the most immediate pressing one right now. And she's also a founding board member of the Psychedelic Bar Association. So we're super excited to welcome Kathryn here. We're going to invite Kathryn to share a little bit about the current status of the Right to Try efforts for access to psilocybin for terminal illness. And then we will open it up for some dialogue and Q&A with everybody here. All right, I'll hand it over to you, Kathryn. Thank you for being here.
Sure. Hey, I wish I was there in person, but thanks for having me Zoom in. Yes, so I am involved with the case that's known as Ames versus DEA. And I have spent my career in advocacy to protect and expand the rights of terminally ill patients. And so when the studies were being published showing the remarkable efficacy of psilocybin for relief of non-physical suffering in patients with advanced illness, I, of course, took note and was excited about how can we make that available sooner. And one of the strategies is to try to employ existing state and federal Right to Try laws to compel the DEA to open a pathway to access to psilocybin for therapeutic use with that patient population. So the Right to Try laws have swept the country like a firestorm. There are 41 state laws and a federal enactment. And the entire gestalt of the Right to Try is the recognition that patients with dynamic, advancing illness don't have the time to wait for the long, slow process of new drug approval to complete. And so certain drugs should be made available for therapeutic use by that population if they meet certain very modest requirements. And those requirements are met with psilocybin. The requirements include having successfully completed a phase 1 clinical trial in the FDA track, and that's true for psilocybin, and the drug must not yet be approved, and it must remain under investigation. So all of that is true for psilocybin. And so we approached the DEA to ask how it would accommodate psilocybin for therapeutic use under Right to Try on behalf of a Seattle-based integrative oncology clinic, its palliative care director, and 2 of the patients with advanced cancer. And the DEA responded by saying it had no authority to permit that. So that answer from the DEA essentially opened the courthouse doors to a federal lawsuit. There is a direct jurisdictional review in the federal appellate court. So we went straight to the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. And that's where the case is currently pending. And we were very fortunate to bring in a big cohort of interested organizations in addition to the petitioners. And so many states, for example, the state of Washington, the state of Oregon, and 8 states filed a friend of the court brief to tell the court that it's important for the DEA to be required to respect right to try, because that's duly enacted state law that relates to the regulation of the practice of medicine, which is something that is in the state's purview. And so we were really happy to see so many states, red states, blue states from across the country, stand up to make that important federalism point. We also had a lot of different public interest groups from everywhere, from the ACLU on the progressive liberal end of the spectrum to the Cato Institute on the conservative end of the political spectrum, came in to file friend of the court briefs in support of mandating that DEA accommodate right to try. So the case, all the briefing is filed. You can access it all on the Emerge Law Group website for any of you that are attorneys or really want to dig deep into the arguments. But as you might imagine, when you are challenging a federal agency action, you run into a lot of administrative law arguments that really have nothing much to do with psilocybin, but they have to do with whether the agency is acting outside the scope of its authority. So a lot of the argument centers on that. A lot of the argument centers on whether the agency action was sufficiently final to allow judicial review. A very easy off-ramp for the court would be to simply say, as the agency is encouraging, that its decision was not sufficiently final to permit a court to reach an opinion. So watch for that when the ruling comes out. We don't know when the ruling will be out, and we don't know what it will look like. So we are, eager to see what happens. But should we have a success, and we do think the law is very strong on our side, should the court require the agency to vacate and remand the decision that it entered, then we'll be very eager to work with the agency in the creation of a pathway that would allow access. And of course, remember here, what we're talking about is access for patients with advanced illness under the supervision of their physician. And so, it was a little bit concerning to me to hear one of the patient speakers here mention, uncertainty about dosing. Obviously, with a physician involved, that kind of uncertainty and maybe anxiety about uncertainty can be mitigated with a professional being involved. So it would resolve some of those issues. And then I think I also heard one of your patient speakers mention that there wasn't a clinical trial that she could join. That's also one of the requirements under Right to Try. To be an eligible patient, one of the criteria is there is not a clinical trial available to you. So, that's another piece of this is determining, should we prevail in the case, determining who the eligible patients are will of course be something that will need to be looked at in each case. But yes, I quite agree with the point that was made that you don't have the time to wait for the long, slow process of the clinical trials to conclude and the long, slow process for rescheduling of psilocybin off of Schedule 1 onto a different schedule. That can take a very long time. So that's why we've brought that case. We're very hopeful of a positive outcome. We're grateful to work with NOAC Society that has served as the fiscal sponsor to help us raise funds to be able to do this advocacy. And if we're successful, it will open the door nationwide to psilocybin for therapeutic use for patients with serious illness. So that would be a big step forward. So I'll just stop there and let you carry on, or I'll certainly stay on in case you have a question I can field.
Great. We'll take the next 10 or 15 minutes or so to take questions from the audience. If you have one, raise your hand. I'm probably just going to repeat it so everybody knows what was said. The question is about right to try, so this might be a good one for you, Kathryn. And how does the law define terminal illness or severe illness? The questioner has cluster headaches and is interested in potential advocacy for other neurological conditions or disorders. Would they qualify under right to try?
Yeah, so as I mentioned, the definition of who would be an eligible patient varies a bit depending on which statute you're looking at. So for example, the federal statute refers to life-threatening illness, which of course could be broader than terminal illness. And some statutes, some of the state statutes use terms like serious illness or advanced illness, and some use terminal illness. So if the ruling in our case results in the DEA accommodating right to try, the state in which the patient is located, is residing, and where the physician is practicing, you would need to take a look at the particulars of that state law. And so it will be a little bit different depending on geography. The other thing as well is we don't know exactly how the court will discuss the interface of the state and the federal law. So that's something that also remains to be seen with the court's ruling. But I would say if you see that it's a favorable ruling, those questions about looking to the state statute in the state in which you reside would be an important first step.
Thank you. So before we close, Kathryn, if there are people here who are excited about what you're doing and want to support it, if there are ways they can get involved, or things they could do that would be helpful to you and your cause, please let us know. How can we help?
Yes, well, thanks so much. And NOAC Society does maintain a fund called the RTT Advocacy Fund. The work that's happening on this case is, of course, public interest work. The potential beneficiaries are patients with serious illness across the country. So we obviously are not charging the 2 cancer patients who are the petitioners and their palliative care doctor. We are handling it as a public interest matter. So we depend on the generosity of donors to make contributions to the RTT Advocacy Fund. So please do that if you haven't and you're excited about this work. And, you know, the work has a lot of different aspects to it as well. We're also interfacing with federal elected officials to encourage them to take an interest in the case and the proper operation of the right to try laws. So we have that federal legislative outreach going on, as well as the litigation. There are a lot of different pieces of this. We're working also with prospective manufacturers so that if we have a favorable ruling, there won't be a lag time between when the pathway to access is open and there's a sufficient supply. Because one thing I should mention about the right to try avenue is that the drug at issue in the clinical trials has been the synthetic psilocybin. And so the drug that would be most clearly within the ambit of the right to try is the same drug that has been used in the clinical trials. So it would be the synthetic version. So it is not a grow your own. It is must be sourced from a manufacturer that is producing a synthetic product that is of a quality that one expects in pharmaceuticals. So we're working with different manufacturers to interest them in being prepared to serve that need if the pathway opens. So we've got a lot of different balls in the air, and all of that takes a lot of time and effort and advocacy to move forward. So thanks for that question.
Great. Thank you both. Thank you, Kathryn. Thank you for sharing your stories, for doing this work. Let's give a big round of applause for them showing up.